And now, please welcome Doug Doughty.
Just out of curiosity, before I left Roanoke this morning, or yesterday, I checked the UVA record book and concluded that I covered 47 football games in which Thomas Jones played. And here I am, 20 years later, still riding Thomas Jones' coattails. I've been thinking about this speech since I got out of church last Sunday. I told myself, when was the last time you thought that sermon was too short? But maybe that's just me. Before I say anything else, there are some people I would like to acknowledge. First of all, my 7 fellow inductees, all more accomplished on the field or in the arena than I am. But first, there's my college sweetheart and wife of 38 years, Beth. In addition to raising our 4 children, she's done wonders as a director of economic development for the Roanoke Valley. And she's kept a few scorebooks and timed a few hundred swimmers along the way. When I told her I was writing my speech, she said, "I'll have to take a look at that." I held up the paper and she said, "That's like a minute and a half." Despite my abiding love for sports, I earned 1 varsity letter, that coming when I was the manager of the football team at St. Albans School in 1970. My kids, and your mom says not to stand up, received a total of 25 varsity letters. Our family motto is, "We're the Doughtys, we keep score." In addition to my fellow inductees, there are 2 men I'd like to recognize who had the greatest influence on my sports writing career. One was the late Bill Brill, the man who hired me straight out of college and was my boss at the Roanoke Times from 1974 till his retirement, and remained a friend and mentor till his passing in 2011. I called up Bill Brill on Google.com and it has his picture with the caption, quote, "American sports writer." Priceless. Brill would like that. He is one of 32 Virginia State Hall of Fame members about whom I have written. Lastly, I'd like to recognize a gentleman with whom I've spoken frequently in recent weeks, longtime Richmond sports editor and executive editor Bill Millsaps, who has a family engagement and could not be here this weekend. In 1973, I was looking at a 4th summer as a bank summer intern in Washington, D.C., when I got a call from Bill Millsaps, a.k.a. Saps. Unbeknownst to me, my father had looked into a summer internship at the Washington Post, and the Post had passed along my application to Richmond. It turns out that I was the first summer intern for the Times-Dispatch in the summer of Secretariat, 1973. I was there for 12 weeks and had 12 bylines, a majority, as I remember, from the Deep Run Horse Show and South Side Speedway. Since then, I've covered such larger events as the Masters and Final Fours and visited 40 states in the process. But what I've enjoyed the most is just telling stories about everyday people in our state and community. There was the 6-year-old who died warming up for a swim meet, the teenager who fell off a rock outcropping on the Appalachian Trail and lived, or the story I'm afraid I'll be known for long after I'm gone, Freckles the ferret, who survived a trip to the washing machine. All those were stories I learned hanging around rec leagues with my kids and my wife. Because as honored as I am to have covered Thomas Jones, the Barber brothers, Barry Parkhill, Ralph Sampson, and others, The times I've enjoyed most in sports have been watching my kids play. Sports have been very good to me, and I am honored to be included with many of the people I wrote about as a member of the Virginia Sports Hall of Fame. Thank you.
Everyone, I'd like to introduce you to Jack Bogacic. Jack is a longtime colleague of Doug's, and he is also a Hall of Famer here. Now, you worked on the same staff as Doug. Are there any attributes or qualities of his that stood out that you believe led him into the Hall of Fame?
Well, I think the big thing about Doug was not only his consistency and professionalism, but his hustle. I mean, he was always after stories. People come into this Hall of Fame, athletes, coaches, because they're competitive. Doug Doughty was competitive also. And the journalists that come into this Hall of Fame, Katie, across the board, are people who have been competitive. And I think that's one thing that always stood out for me with Doug. Another thing that I would like to mention was in the intro. Doug developed the recruiting coverage that the Roanoke Times had far beyond what we had before. And it came at a really important time, I thought, because that was when Coach Beamer and Coach George Welsh at Virginia were just really starting to get their programs going, keeping Virginia players in Virginia. And Doug was on top of that. He was one of the foremost recruiting guys in the country, especially on in-state recruiting. And that's a couple of the things that stood out for me.
And it's a real shame that he doesn't have a sense of humor, huh?
Exactly. Here's the thing about it. You have to see Doug's office, or at least the way it was when I worked with him. It's a U-shaped desk, and it's stacked high with papers. You might call it the Doughty decimal system. But here was the thing that frustrated me. I would go into his office and I would say, remember a year and a half ago you wrote this story, or you had an item in your college notebook about someone? And he would say, yes. And I would say, do you remember what you wrote or whatever? Well, maybe if he didn't remember it, he would go reach into one of these stacks. Now, who knew what was in those? He would reach into one of the stacks, and within 5 or 10 sheets of paper, he would find that note. If Doughty had been a Major League Baseball player like Michael Kadire, he would have led the majors in saves. He saves everything.
Jack, thank you.